Good day everyone, and welcome back to the Abyss Full of Goats channel, where we often take a look at all aspects of GOAT format, from decks to strategies. However, that is not what we'll be doing today. Now today we'll be looking at the other legacy format that rivals GOAT in popularity, Edison format. Named at the event SCG Edison in 2010, Edison format was smack dab in the middle of the Synchro era, and as such is a lot faster than GOAT in its gameplay, with far stronger early game plays, while still maintaining the kind of play older fans who dislike the rapid pace of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Can enjoy. As such, it's both accessible to older fans who like GOAT, and newer fans of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Alike. If you'd like a more general overview of the format, I would highly encourage you to watch E3 Yu-Gi-Oh's videos on the format, or CMO's History of Yu-Gi-Oh! Series. Like GOAT guides, this series assumes you are somewhat familiar with the basics of this format. So with that being said, let's get on with one of the best decks in Edison, Blackwings. Now when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! There are very few decks so beloved that they span many years of competitive play, and are played by a dedicated group of players long after their time in the spotlight is over. These are decks like Burning Abyss, Heroes, and of course Blackwings. Released first in Crossroads of Chaos in 2009, and the deck of one of the most beloved 5D characters, Blackwings use its aggressive playstyle, swarming abilities, and powerful synchro summoning to make one of the strongest decks in the late 2000s, even going on to win Worlds in 2009. A deck somewhat ahead of its time, Blackwings represented a leap forward in terms of the game's speed, and was really the first deck to spam multiple monsters in the field in one turn. Now by the time the Edison format rolled around in 2010, Blackwings weren't quite as good as they were in their prime, with their best monster being put to 1 and their best spell at 2, and one of their best draw cards also being at 1. But those minor hits were nowhere near enough to cripple this deck, and it was still among the top 3 decks for this format. So let's see what that is. We'll dive into Blackwings. I mentioned that in this format, Blackwing's best monster was limited to 1 at the time, which I think is a good place to start, so let's begin this guide with Blackwing Gale the Whirlwind. A level 3 tuner monster, Gale has the ability that if you control any other Blackwing monster, it can be special summoned from your hand. Also, once per turn, Gale can take a monster the opponent controls and cut attack points in half. Like I said, this guy is actually wearing a few Edison decks due to this effect, and for being a good level for a tuner, but he truly shines among his fellow birds, as we'll see now. Firstly, this card being a level 3 tuner gives us easy access to several good synchro monsters, both in and out of archetype, including using a level 2 Blackwing to make Armed Wing, a level 3 to make Newthong the Starlight, and a level 4 to make Blackwing Armor Master, as well as many other good generic synchros like GOYO Guardian, all of which I'll talk about later on in this video. In addition to this, the attack halving effect is very useful, because while many Blackwings do have high stats for level 4 and below, they're still fairly weak compared to a lot of cards in this format, and a few of them need to attack for their effects to activate. These effects can help us swarm the field, synchro summon easier, and win the game a lot faster, so any way for them to easily get through is welcome in this deck. Continuing the theme of Blackwing swarming the field, we next have SHURA the Blue Flame. The strongest normal summon in Blackwings at 1800 attack, SHURA is one of the easiest ways this deck has of getting out synchros, because when he destroys a monster in battle, he lets you summon any Blackwing with 1500 or less attack from your deck and negate its effects. As I said, this is an easy way to pull out a level 2 to 4 tuners from the deck, essentially making SHURA a 1-card synchro. In addition to this, in the late game, SHURA can also help us close out games by pulling another monster with enough attack power to win the game from our deck. Now granted, due to the attack point limitation, we can't get our big beaters with this, however sometimes in the late game getting an extra 1200 points of damage on board can be enough to clinch the game. After SHURA, our next big beater is BORA the Spear at 1700 attack. In addition to adding to our beatdown game plan, BORA, also like SHURA, helps us swarm the field for synchro plays, and being a level 4 it makes him a really good card to go into Armor Master, one of our great generic rank 6s and 7s with. You see, BORA can summon himself from the hand if we control any Blackwing monster. This not only makes him the best way to synchro summon turn 1, a 7 plus a Blackwing tuner can mean any synchro between 6 and 8 depending on the tuner, but also a decent extender even in modern Blackwings. In addition to this, BORA also inflicts piercing damage, which may not sound as impressive in effect, but when you consider one of the best cards in this format is Raiko, you can see how this can be devastating in the right circumstances. Finally, in our beatdown Blackwings, we have the start of half the Yu-Gi-Oh! Progression series, and the card that probably keeps Gage up at night, Kalute the Moon Shadow. A 1400 attack monster, Kalute is one of the biggest Blackwings we can get off of SHURA. But who cares about that, because unless you really need a body on board, you'll never want to summon this guy. That's because during the damage step you can discard Kalute to give any Blackwing a 1400 attack point boost. Now there are a few things you should know about this effect. Firstly, it's not once per turn, meaning if you're lucky enough to open multiples of this card, you can stack this effect to make your Blackwings gigantic. Secondly, because this effect happens in damage, there isn't much the opponent can do to stop it, as all you can do during damage is modify stats. And thirdly, you can do this during either player's turn, meaning this card is both poking in for lethal damage on your turn and basing your opponent is making bad attacks on their turn. In fact, the fear of a colluded hand can sometimes be enough to dissuade attacks all by itself, without you needing to play a card. So all in all, colluded is by far one of the biggest keys to Blackwing success in this format, and will likely steal you many wins if you play this deck. Finally in our battling Blackwings, we have Sirocco the Dawn, a level 5 with 2000 attack. Now anyone who knows their Yu-Gi-Oh history will know that Cyber Dragon, being a 2k plus body you could summon with that attribute if your opponent had a monster and you didn't, warped the meta, and it's no less powerful here as Sirocco can normal summon himself if your opponent controls a monster and you don't. This makes him not only the strongest monster you can normal summon in this deck, but in the right circumstances a very quick game ender if you use his other effect correctly. You see, once per turn you can use Sirocco to have one Blackwing gain the attack of all of the Blackwings you control. However, only that monster can attack that turn. That means that if you open this plus Bora, you can swing a 3700 piercer at the Raikou your opponent likely set turn 1 and do over 3000 points of damage. Add on to this the effect of Collude and you could be looking at taking over half your opponent's life turn 1, so that's insanely fast even in this format. Adding on to this, if instead of summoning Bora you summon Gale, Sirocco can also be a turn 1 Stardust Dragon or any other good level 8 synchro, giving you protection from most removal turn 1 and a 25k body on board. Having gone through the Blackwing Beatdown clan, we still have 2 Blackwings to discuss for this list, those being the other 2 tuner monsters the archetype plays, beginning with the coolest card in the deck, Blizzard the Far North. A level 2 tuner making him ideal for getting out level 6 and 7 synchros, Blizzard, unlike most of his contemporaries, actually can't be special summoned. However, he does still contribute to this deck's swarming capabilities in other ways. You see, when he's normal summoned, Blizzard can revive any level 4 or lower Blackwing back to the field in defense. And because of this last part of the effect, you cannot use this card to contribute to beatdown strategies. However, if you are behind in the game, there's no better card to help you make a comeback by sending a defeated Blackwing back to the field to make a level 6 or 7 synchro. This makes Blizzard an ideal turn 2 play, especially when combined with a certain trap we'll get to later. And the final Blackwing in this deck is actually one we'll be seeing again on this channel at some point, as not only is he a great card in standard Blackwing lists like this one, but he also has an entire deck based on turboing him out, and that is Blackwing Value with the Emblem of Honor. I said that Collude was a Blackwing you rarely wanted on the field, but unless you need exactly 800 points of damage to push for lethal, or you need fodder for a certain trap, you never want to have this guy on the field at all. This is because Value cannot be used for a synchro summon on field. So instead what we want to do is find someone to dump this guy to the graveyard. That's because, well, while he can't be used for synchro on the field, he can be used to synchro summon with monsters in the graveyard, by banishing himself and a non-tuner Blackwing. What's crazy about this, other than giving you great comeback and extension potential, is that none of this is a cost but an effect. Meaning that, say, if your opponent has a card that allows them to pay life to prevent a special summon, this card can keep using its effect until it resolves. Hint hint. I talk about this card more in depth when I showcase Value Turbo, but suffice to say this card is one of the main reasons Blackwings are so high level in Edison tier rankings, giving them great recovery options, the ability to put out massive damage at any point in the game, and most important of all, the ability to just ignore the most powerful floodgate ever printed in Yu-Gi-Oh! Arguably. Now Blackwings are one of the heaviest monster focused decks in Edison, and since we require so little backward to make this deck work, it means we have several options for additional monsters to boost this deck should we choose to. Outside of the birds themselves, one of the best options for this deck is Dark Arm Dragon. A few years prior to Edison, Dark Arm Dragon terrorized the game with his insane effect, pushed stats, and easy summoning condition, being the key card in the first recognised Tier 0 deck, Teledad, and he's just as strong here as he ever was. As long as you have exactly 3 dark monsters in your grave, you can summon Dad from your hand, and once he hits the field, he's a massive 200 body that allows you to banish Dark from grave to pop any card on the field. And like most overpowered cards of this era, this is not a once per turn effect. So this is powerful enough, but what makes it even worse is the fact that priority, or the right to activate an effect as Chain Link 1, was still in effect at this time, I mean, unless your opponent had a Solemn Judgment, it meant you were guaranteed one use of this effect before the opponent can respond with, say, a Torrential Tribute or Book of Moon. Now, with a deck like Blackwings that can somewhat manipulate its grave with cards like Colute and Vayu, Dad is a really powerful tech option, as it will be available for a few turns and gives the deck not only another way to remove monsters, but also a massive body to quickly sweep up games. Now, some Blackwing decks choose to end their monster lineup here. However, there are a few more options you can choose if you want to. Some players choose to lean into the Dark Arm Dragon and Vayu synergies and play things like Dark Grepher and Armageddon Knight to dump cards more easily. Others play cards like Cyber Dragon for additional power on board, and because of this lean into the Chaos theme by sometimes playing things like Chaos Sorcerer and Thunder King Ryu. And yet more players try to make the deck more anti-meta with Ryu and Fossil Diner to prevent special summoning. Basically, while most of Blackwing monster lineup is fairly standard, there is room for a few techs depending on your meta and playstyle. Moving on to the extra deck, we'll begin with the Blackwing specific cards, but moving on to briefly covering generic synchros that we see in a lot of decks in this format. Starting with the lowest level is Blackwing Armed Wing, which requires a Blackwing tuner and any monster. Essentially a buffed up Bora, Armed Wing has a 2300 piercer that also gains 500 attack when attacking. Pretty much everything I said about Bora also applies here. This card will also devastate a player who just sits on Raikou and passes, and this plus a Colute will vaporise at least a third of an opponent's life in one shot, only more so now with the extra attack it gains. Next up we have an underappreciated Blackwing in Blackwing Silverwind the Ascendant, a level 8 synchro that requires a Blackwing tuner and 2 non-tuner Blackwings, so it makes up for its high cost by having a really powerful effect. When he's summoned, this card can take out 2 monsters whose defense is weaker than his attack. Now, I'm sure there are a few exceptions, but this more or less lets you take out any relevant monster in this format, and this effect does help soften the blow of all the resources you sunk into him. Just remember, you can't attack the turn you use this effect, but let's be honest, if you bring this guy out, you're likely to out him whenever you destroyed anyway. Finally, this card gives the deck a bit more needed protection, by preventing the first time a Blackwing will be destroyed by battle. Now, outside of Whirlwind, one thing Blackwings do struggle with is making a comeback after losing their field, so any way we have of keeping them around longer is greatly appreciated. Truthfully, this won't stop non-battling destruction, but it is something. Finally, in the Blackwing synchro spot, we have Blackwing Armor Master, not only the biggest Blackwing synchro, but the true boss of this deck. Master is a level 7 synchro monster that cannot be destroyed by battle, and he also takes no damage from any battle he is involved in, so already this guy fits well into the aggro themes of this deck. However, even if there is a monster we can't run over, don't worry, as when this card battles a monster, it leaves behind a wedge token, which can be removed and then take all the monster's attack points with it, reducing them to 0. So in other words, this guy, not only can you beat over most things, but also you can make any monster that you can't beat over susceptible to anything like a Bora or any other normal Blackwing. So that's it for the archetype specific synchros. However, I will briefly go over the generic cards used in this deck, which I'll give a more thorough breakdown of when we do the Quick Draw Dandy Warrior video, as that is basically the GO control of this format. First up, we have the Cyber Dragon Fusion monster Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon. Other than being a big body, this is the other main reason some Blackwing decks run the good old Goat Killer. Requiring 1 Cyber Dragon and 1 or more machine, Fortress gets 1000 attack for each monster used to make it. Now already this can be a 2 to 3k beater, however it can also use any machine on the field, including the opponents, to make it. Now this gives us an advantage against machine decks like Machina Gadgets for example, and it can also be used to out opposing Cyber Dragons, a monster that most main deck Blackwings without Colute have trouble running over. Now Cyber Dragon isn't majorly common, but it does see enough play that this can be a good tech option. Next up we have the face of the synchro mechanic, Stardust Dragon, aka the first good anime protagonist boss monster. Having the usual ace monster stats of 2500 attack and 2000 defense, Stardust has the ability to tribute itself and negate any destruction effect, be it targeted or a full field wipe. In addition to this, Stardust can bring himself back at the end of the turn. Now like I mentioned before, the biggest issue with Blackwing is that while they are great at swarming the field and setting up good synchro plays, they struggle immensely if board wiped, as they put so much resources into their combos and plays compared to other decks, that a single board wipe can be a detrimental setback to them. So anything like Stardust that tanks that board wipe is an invaluable asset. And speaking of board wipes, next up we have another Signer Dragon in Black Rose Dragon, a level 7 synchro with 2400 attack, Black Rose is essentially the opposite of Stardust. While Stardust protects your monsters, Black Rose wipes out your opponents, as upon synchro summon she will destroy every card on the field, making it both an amazing comeback card in this deck and one of, if not the main reason, we need to run Stardust in our deck, as if our opponent drops this on us, it could well and truly be game over. Now, like I've been saying, a Dark Hole effect isn't exactly what Blackwings want. However, this card is certainly a case of desperate times calling for desperate measures, and this card can definitely help put you and your opponent on a more even playing field if you've just lost your board, as this will give you a chance to buy some time to rebuild in that case. Next up we have Colossal Fighter, a massive 2800 attack warrior monster that gains an additional 100 for each warrior in either player's graveyard. Depending on what we're up against, this may give him a decent boost. However, considering we aren't playing any warriors in our deck, we should just assume he'll be a 2800 attack most of the time. In addition to this, when this card is destroyed, he lets us revive a warrior from either player's graveyard. Again, while this effect is mostly dependent on our opponent, it can help rebuild our board by setting up a new monster to use for synchro plays or beatdown strategies if we're lucky. So essentially the floor for this card is just a big beater, but the ceiling is a big beater that can also help us rebuild in a pinch. Next we have the two synchros best known for being crippled later on in the game with awful erratas, GOYO Guardian and Bryonic Dragon of the Ice Barrier. Starting with GOYO, he's a level 6 monster that requires just one tuner and one non-tuner. Something I point out here because his errata means he only needs an earth tuner to make him, and whenever he destroys a monster in battle, he can summon the destroyed monster to our field in defense position. While this will not prevent graveyard effects because the card does hit the graveyard before being summoned, it does allow us to potentially take some of our opponent's best synchros like Stardust, some of their best tuners, or some of their best reusable effects like Dark Armed Dragon and Dark Grepher. And finally, in our main lineup of synchro monsters, we have Bryonic Dragon of the Ice Barrier, which is a level 5 synchro with the ability that you can discard any number of cards in your hand to bounce the same number of cards on the field to their owner's hands. Note two things about this effect. One, it isn't limited to your opponent's cards, and two, it's not a hard once per turn, which is what the errata was. This means that not only can this card be a board clearer, capable of wiping out the opponent's entire field by itself, it can also be used to put cards like Colute back into our hand, or reuse cards like Snow, or even put value back in our hand for discard effects. This is one of the most powerful synchros of the era, and there is reason that it was banned for ages before being errated into the dirt. Now there are other synchros you play in this deck, but they're very sparingly used. I think it would be more appropriate for me to go into detail about those cards when we talk about Quick Draw Dandy Warrior, which is not only the premier synchro deck of this format, but also in many ways the go control of the format. Moving on to the spells, let's begin with one of the key cards of the Blackwing strategy, Black Whirlwind. I think I've made it clear that Blackwing's biggest strength is their field swarming capabilities, and no card does this better than Black Whirlwind. A continuous spell, on the normal summon of a Blackwing, it allows you to add a weaker Blackwing from deck to your hand. I mentioned earlier that this, along with Gale, was the Blackwing card that was on the list at the time. This one at 2, and I think you can see why here. With this card on the field and any high attack Blackwing, you can now get access to your whole synchro toolbox. Sirocco and SHURA can give you access to a Piercer or Attack Reducer, and any Blackwing other than Blizzard and Gale can now beat over anything with less than 2800 attack because you can just search for Colute. Along with Gale, this card is the main reason Blackwings dominated the late 2000s and early 2010s, as it took one of the best aggro/combo decks ever seen at this point and removed the only downside such decks have, which is running out of cards late game. Again, like Bora, this card is so good it sees play in modern Blackwings, being one of the best extenders. So imagine how good it is in this format with 10 years less power creep. Keeping with the theme of limited cards in this deck, we next have Allure of Darkness, one of the best draw spells ever made at this time. For the cost of banishing a dark monster, which this deck is full of, we can draw 2 cards. Not much to say here, as seeing 2 cards is always good, but the one thing I will add is that this card can potentially draw us more of our non-once per turn effects, most notably Colute, and also allow us to ditch potential brick cards, most notably a late game Dark Armed Dragon that we can no longer summon. Next up we have the unerrated Brain Control and its counterpart Mind Control, another couple of powerful cards, and in this case some of the most powerful cards to play in a synchro dominated format like Edison. Now we all know that Brain Control pre-errata is a powerful card, almost on the same level as Change of Heart, with the only difference being it costs 800 points to activate, which isn't much of a cost at all, and it cannot hit face down monsters, which I admit is a bit of a downside because you can't take opposing Rykos. However, it can take almost any other good staple in the format, from big synchros like Stardust Dragons, to main deckers like Judgment Dragon, to even good tuners to help make our own synchros. Now, Mind Control is very similar, however I want to talk about it separately because this card is the poster child for bad or mediocre cards becoming broken as the game evolves. Like Brain Control, this card allows us to take control of a monster our opponent controls, and this one can hit face downs too, so yeah, give me that Ryko please. However, in exchange for this, the monster cannot attack or be tributed. Because of this card saw almost no play points initial release, as it was only useful for taking away flip monsters and using their effects. However, as new swing mechanics like synchros became available, this card's downside became less and less important, and this card basically became almost as good as Change of Heart, as only did it let us take cards like Judgment Dragon, Dad, Ryko and Chaos Sorcerer to get their effects, but also let us steal other opponents' tuner monsters to use them for synchro material. As other than these cards, the rest of the spellline should be very familiar to anyone who's seen my GOAT format videos. Being an aggro deck needs a clear board as often as possible, we run the somehow still unbanned Heavy Storm, and some builds go a step further and also run Giant Trunade as ways of clearing away opponents' back row. In addition to this, we also run MST for more back row clearing, although unlike GOAT, we no longer run Dust Tornado, as a trap card like that is too slow by 2010 standards. In addition to this, we often see a playset of another GOAT staple in Book of Moon Ran. A quick play spell, Book of Moon allows us to flip any monster face down. A staple in many aggro decks, this card, much like its role in GOAT, allows our own monsters to dodge removal, most notably Mirror Force. However, in this deck it's mostly used on the opponent's monsters to allow cards like Bora and Shura to easily run over them. This is especially good in Monarch matches, but can also turn off our opponent's Stardust Dragons and other monsters with activated effects like Judgment Dragon. We also occasionally see cards like Upstart Goblin to boost consistency. However, for the most part this deck's wins will come from its monsters and traps, not really its spells, so they kept it more of a minimum. Speaking of which, let's take a look at the traps, shall we? Finally, let's look at the traps. Honestly, there is very little unique in this deck's trap lineup, which for the purpose of this video isn't that bad, because it gives me the chance to showcase some staples of the format again. However, there is one trap that is pretty much unique to this deck, so I think it's best we start there. Now, given Blackwings were at this point the only good winged beast deck in Yu-Gi-Oh!, Harpies wouldn't get support for a while yet, and also a hyper quick aggro deck, it's no shock that we run 3 copies of ICARUS Attack. A normal trap, ICARUS Attack allows us to take one of our winged beasts and trade them in to pop any 2 cards on the field. Now, while this is straight 2 for 2 in terms of card advantage, the fact that you can destroy anything on the field means there's a definite 3 of in this deck, as it can out anything from giant boss monsters to set back row and even problematic floodgates. Also, with the likes of Blizzard and Value working with the graveyard, it's not too difficult to take this card's negative effects and essentially cancel them out, making ICARUS Attack not only one of the best removal pieces, but also a potential play extender. Next up in our trap lineup is one of, if not the most broken trap ever created, Royal Oppression. God, don't those words describe written lately. For my younger viewers who don't know what this card does, take Vanity's Emptiness, make it more broken, and you have Royal Oppression. A continuous trap, Oppression allows both players to pay 800 life points to prevent a special summon. This is not once per turn, and there's no real downsides to this card. So yeah, as you can see, this card is kinda busted, being able to slow down almost any deck in the game at the time, and cripple some of the more powerful special summon focused decks, like Lightsworn. In fact, this card is one of the main reasons that Blackwings are so good in this format, because not only can cards like Shura, Bora and Gale play well under the Oppression lock, but we also have Value, who can ignore this card altogether and still spit out synchro monsters. Up next, for out of GOAT format and still relevant, we have Mirror Force, just a few months before its mass release in Structure Deck Marek. For the one person who doesn't know what Mirror Force does, Mirror Force activates when we're attacked and destroys all attack position monsters the opponent controls. The terror of GOAT format, fear of being blown up by this card is the main reason for the format's slower, more conservative pace, where many players won't commit to a massive board until this card is gone. And while it's not quite as game warping in this format, due to more ways to counter it like Stardust Dragon, as well as the increasing graveyard effects, this card can still be a blowout if timed correctly. Which again is another reason the Stardust is so important in this deck, to prevent our board from being Mirror Forced into oblivion and us possibly losing soon after. Mirror Force made me quite the ultimate game warrior it was back in GOAT, but there was still a reason to be overjoyed when this card was mass reprinted a few months after Edison. Up next we have one of the best video game promos of all time in Dark Bribe. A counter trap, Dark Bribe is essentially a magic jammer with the neg1 discard to make that card unplayable, as it allows us to counter any spell at the cost of letting the opponent draw a card. Now yes, we don't really want our opponents to see more cards, however in a format that includes Pre-Errata Future Fusion, Heavy Storm, Gold Sarcophagus and many more busted spells, that one card can sometimes mean the difference between a blowout loss and a win for us. So yes, even though the +1 for the opponent isn't really good, it's definitely worth it in this case. Finally we have the one-offs. First up we have the only hand attack card still legal at the time in DUSTSHOOT. Another GOAT aggro staple, DUSTSHOOT can only be activated if our opponent has at least 4 cards in hand. It allows us to look at the opponent's hand and shuffle any monster in it back into the deck. Now again, there's a reason this was the only legal hand attack card at the time, and the same reason why the much worse Appointed of the Red Lotus was recently banned. It's because hand attack cards are bull. Not only does this card give us perfect hand knowledge, allowing us to better plan a strategy for the opponent's turn, but it also allows us to take the biggest threat out of their hand, possibly crippling them. Now this was a strong enough card in GOAT, but in a synchro focused format like this, it's possible this card can completely destroy an entire deck that's heavily focused on synchros, as you can shuffle away their only tuner or their only non-tuner that's needed to make a specific monster. Next up we have what may be the most powerful trap in the game at the time, Solemn Judgment. A counter trap, this card allows us to pay half our life points to negate any card on the field. Simple yet immensely powerful, Judgment was criminally underrated for years, seeing minimal play till around 2008 when people realised just how strong it was, and there's that seen played pretty much everywhere. Now it's true this card does cost half your life to play, but just like any big corporate job in Yu-Gi-Oh! Your life doesn't matter, as long as it's not 0, and the ability to essentially say no to anything is well worth it. This card will often be a +2 if it hits a synchro monster, as you've given up only 1 card for the minimum of 3 the opponent needed to bring that monster out. It can stop the activation of blowout cards like Heavy Storm and Royal Oppression, and it can also prevent any problematic monsters in the opponent's main deck like Dark Hound Dragon and Judgment Dragon. Overall, there's very little in this format more worrying than SOLEMN in this era, and it being at 1 made it the most sacky card ever at the time, so yeah, we do run the one we can. Finally we have the card that protects all this busted back row in Starlight Road, which allows us to cheat at a Stardust Dragon if 2 or more back row will be destroyed, and then negate that card. Now as I have made clear in this video, Stardust was a busted card in this era, being able to prevent almost any destruction effect of the time, so being able to summon it for free is amazing. However, don't ignore that spell and trap negation, as combined with Stardust it means that our opponent will need at least 3 backward removal cards to wipe our board, something that I've shown was exactly plentiful at this time. So in conclusion, Blackwings are definitely an old deck, but they're still very good. Despite being from 2009, they're still at the top of the pecking order of Edison format greatness. I hope you guys liked this video, and I'll see you guys soon. We'll talk about the Edison iteration of my favourite deck of all time. See you guys then.